Well, hello everybody. It is Tuesday. Yeah, you're not seeing that incorrectly. It is Tuesday. Um, and yeah, I'm gonna be doing the recap today via the pod instead of the preview. Mainly just because I wanted to try something else, just kind of try something new, see if I like doing it this way, see if you guys like doing it this way. It's gonna be a little bit different. I can go over some different things. It's probably not going to be as long with me just kind of going over the matchups, more so than me just making predictions the whole time and all that shit. So probably should be a lot shorter than it was last time. I say that now, but I was dead on an hour and a half the last two times. So not going to promise anything this time, but we'll see how it goes. But yeah, like I said, I just wanted to maybe just try something new. And just switch it up and maybe do the Thursday email this week and do the Tuesday pod. So that's what we're gonna do today. It was an interesting week. It's just some weird shit happened in the NFL. So I love the NFL so much is because as you'd think that there's just not so much parity in it. Like you think that the good teams are supposed to be good, bad teams are going to be bad. You think it's easy to predict, easy to bet on, but it's just really not. There's just some weird shit that happens, and like this week, there was just some weird things going on, and just this year in general. I've been talking about it all season. It's just a weird year of football and a weird year of fantasy. So it's staying right on that trend. We're officially halfway through the season. There's 18 weeks, and we're going into week 10 here coming up. So yeah, we're officially at the halfway mark. That's crazy to think that we're already there. Fuck, it's just zooming by. It's crazy. Okay, well, let's without further ado, let's just go ahead and just get right into it. And same as the email, we're going to start with the in memoriam for week 9. Cue the music. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start strong with me versus Case, and I got just fucking massacred. 73.54 to 117.22. For Casey's standards, it was a pretty low week. I know we were both on pretty serious bye shit going on. Casey had Najee Harris, Nick Chubb, Brandon Ayuk, Greg Dulcich on bye. I had Deebo Samuel, Ezekiel Elliott, Dalton Schultz. I had Pickens on a bye. So we were both kind of scrambling to put a team together. And where I landed, I thought it was pretty good. I was actually projected to win when this week started and put up fucking 73.54 fucking points. I had two guys getting double digits this week. That was Joe Burrow, 21.14. They murdered the Carolina Panthers, but had nothing to do with Joe Burrow, and I'll get to that here in a little bit. But Joe Burrow, 206 yards and 2 total touchdowns. It's a respectable outing, but at 42-21, you'd really think that he would play a big part of it. Not so much. And then my only other double-digit point total was my Philly defense, who finished with 10. And that was even pretty underwhelming for what I thought going into that week against Houston. They had 2 picks, allowed 17 points. It's fine, if your defense gets about 10, what they start with, that's fine. But I expected a little bit more out of the Philly defense at home. But at the end of the day, it didn't mean anything. I lost by a fucking 100 this week. Last night, Kamara didn't really do anything. The Saints looked horrible last night, last night, Monday Night Football. Kamara, just the 30 rushing yards and 32 receiving yards, finished with 9.2. Failed to get in the end zone. I was dead wrong about that one. I like the Saints at home. Nope. Mostert did find the end zone, but just 8.6 points on 26 rushing yards. It just not really involved in that game very much. Tyler Boyd, same as Joe Burrow. That game, points did not come in the air. Tyler Boyd, 5 catches, 44 yards, 9.4. Romeo Doubs, he had 1 catch for 18 yards right at the very beginning of the game, and his ankle exploded on the very same play. So that was all she wrote for Romeo Doubs, 2.8 points. Thank you very much. Mike Gesicki, 1 catch for 3 yards. You're welcome, Abby, for taking that shit stain off of your team. 1.3 points. Deontay Foreman against Cincinnati. He was just completely eviscerated out of that game script pretty much from the get-go. He had 23 total yards, 4.1 points. And then my kicker got 7. So, yeah, 2 guys got double-digit points for me. It's 73.54. I think is maybe the lowest total I've had in the last 3 seasons. I can't remember the last time I got that low. And it's definitely one of the lowest scoring point totals of this season out of anybody. So, real cool. Real cool on that one. Now for Case, like I said, it wasn't a great day for Case, but he didn't need to be great. He didn't need to be good. He didn't even need to be bad to beat me. He had to be just slightly above whatever shit level is to beat me. So Jalen Hurts, it was a good day from him. Beat Houston on Thursday Night Football. He had 243 yards and 2 touchdowns, 23 points. He did exactly what he was supposed to that game. A.J. Dillon, Green Bay looked so fucking bad against Detroit and actually lost to the Lions, which is crazy. Liked Green Bay in that game. That's one I got wrong. A.J. Dillon had 34 yards, 6.4 points. Nothing crazy, but, again, didn't really matter. Caleb Huntley, he ended up being the 3rd stringer for Atlanta now that Cordero Patterson's back, and he had 34 yards for 3.4 points, so nothing big there. Stephon Diggs, he still had 93 yards on 5 catches. That's a good, that's his floor pretty much is 14, 15 points. That's how good he is when his floor is going to be about 14 points. Didn't get in the end zone. The Jets actually kept him in check, which I thought was going to happen with Buffalo. I thought Buffalo was too big of a favorite for, on the road against the Jets. And then the Jets actually beat him, which doesn't fully surprise me, but Diggs 14.3. It was a decent day for him. It was a great day again for Waddle, 5 catches, 85 yards and a touchdown. That game was a total shootout against the Bears. I did get that one right. I had Miami the -3, so you would have gotten a push on that if you bet it, which means that it hits exactly that line, which means they just give you your bet back. Did get that one. Waddle played a huge part. 5 catches, 85 yards, touchdown, 19.5 points. Isaiah Likely, which it was a good pickup for Case at the tight end position. Mark Andrews in Baltimore was hurt. Isaiah Likely stepped in. He had 1 catch, 24 yards, and a touchdown, and that's it. It was good for 9.4 fantasy points. So that's all you need really in a spot like that for Case when you're just picking somebody up. So worked out good for him there. Michael Pittman, he had 3 catches for 22 yards, 5.2 points. I liked New England in this game. That was always going to be a tough one for the Colts. They lost 3-26. And on the other side of the ball there, that New England defense was fucking insane, which Casey had. They got 28 points. They had a pick 6, another interception. They only allowed 3 points, and they blocked a kick, if I remember right, as well. So it was just a fucking monster day for New England, which is kind of just pissing in the wound that was my fantasy team. So overall, yeah, Case's team did what they were supposed to. Good for him getting the win. Having his 2 starting running backs on bye. Like I said, he just needed to be not horrific to beat me this week. So that was the story of me. Now it's crazy that this is an obituary this week, but God, it is. When you put up 153.28 and you still get obitted, which is crazy. Sam lost by 35 points to Emily, 188.8 to 153.28, which is crazy. When you put up 153 fucking points, that's having a bad day. That's just kind of summing up Sam's fantasy season so far. It's just nothing's really going his way right now. Tua was great, as he has been since he's come back from his fucking soup brain injury. 302 yards and 3 touchdowns, 32.08 points. Game script worked out really well for him in this one. It was a complete shootout, 35-32 to Chicago. and he was just hucking the ball. So, yeah, good for Tua there. James Conner finally decided that he wanted to play some football after his injury. He had 11.4 points. You know, he had 45 rushing yards, 19 receiving yards. So 11.4 out of Conner in your RB1 spot. Not too bad. Where he got hurt, though, was David Montgomery. He had just 36 yards in a game where Chicago just didn't really have to run the ball. Well, scratch that. Justin Fields ran the ball. He actually was setting fucking NFL records for how much he ran the ball. I'll tell you exactly what it was. He rushed for 178 yards and a touchdown. And luckily for Sam, not like it would have really mattered, because M would have put up 200-something points if he had been in, but had Justin Fields on her bench, who had put up 52.72 points, threw for 123 yards and had 4 total touchdowns, including that rushing touchdown that I mentioned. So completely phased out David Montgomery, unfortunately for Sam, who only finished with 5.4. Who bounced back in a huge way, though, were both of Sam's wide receivers. Justin Jefferson, 7 catches, 115 yards and a touchdown, 27.5 points. And Devontae Adams, 10 catches, 146 yards and 2 touchdowns, 38.6. When you draft back-to-back wide receivers, when you take those 2 guys, that's what you expect, right? You expect getting 60 points out of 2 guys, pretty much. So huge days for those guys. Jefferson got the win over Washington 2017. Devontae Adams on that absolute fucking clown car of a Raiders team that he's on. They were up 20-0 in that game against Jacksonville and ended up fucking losing 27-20. One of my big bets of the weekend that I was saying was Jacksonville home money line. And I thought that was dead on fucking, below the sea. I thought that was a dead body on the fucking, underneath the highway, that bet. But Jacksonville scored 27 unanswered points and ended up winning that game. So that one actually worked out for me. Let's see here. Hawkinson, he had a good debut in Minnesota. He had 9 catches for 70 yards. I didn't know how he was going to factor into that offense with Justin Jefferson and Feelin, but he got in. His workload was great. 9 catches, 70 yards, and 16 fantasy points. So it worked out good for Sam that they found a good balance between Jefferson and Hawkinson in that Minnesota offense. Drake London, just 3 catches for 23 yards, 3.3 fantasy points. Just couldn't really get anything going against the Chargers, even though Atlanta only lost by 3 in that game. My bet of the weekend was Chargers -3, and it's too bad it didn't win. They covered exactly that, so got another push. So you didn't lose your money, but you didn't win either, which kind of sucks. But yeah, Drake London just didn't play any role in that Atlanta offense at all. And then the Tampa Bay defense got Sam 9 points. As I predicted, that was a low-scoring shithole of a game. Tampa Bay versus the Rams, 16-13. Not a whole lot of offense. Two decent defenses and 2 struggling offenses. That was always set up to be the under. So, but if you had the Tampa Bay defense like Sam did, 9 points, not too bad. But unfortunately, it just it wasn't enough. 153.28 wasn't enough to beat M's 188.8. And you're about to see why that was. We'll start with Josh Allen, though. Josh Allen was okay in this game. He took it upon himself after the game as to why they lost. Like, they asked him, they said, how are you feeling after the game? Or how do you feel losing to a division rival, the Jets? And he said, well, it's tough when you're playing a good team and your quarterback plays like shit, is exactly what he says. And that might be a little harsh, but he did throw 2 picks. He had 205 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. So for Josh Allen's sake, for his standards, it wasn't great, but he still got M 24.8 fantasy points. So, that's just fine there for out of your starting QB. But fucking Joe Mixon, oh my God, he had a historic day, in a day that cucked me out of my Joe Burrow points and my Tyler Boyd points. Joe Mixon had 5 fucking touchdowns. He had 153 rushing yards and he had 58 receiving yards, and one of his touchdowns was a receiving touchdown. 57.1 points. It's one of the best running back fantasy days in the history of fantasy football. It's definitely Mixon's best day in his career by a mile, and it's just one of the bigger fantasy days out of just any position that we've seen. So good for M. Joe Mixon finally had his breakout game. It was coming. Everybody was waiting for him to have his big game, but he blew that out of the fucking water by a shitload. A big Mixon game was going to be probably 3 touchdowns, but yeah, he had 153 rushing yards and 5 total touchdowns, 57.1. That's absurd. Travis Etienne against Vegas. Another great day for him. 28.6 fantasy points. He had 109 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, and he also chipped in with 17 receiving yards on 2 catches. So she's getting exactly what was promoted out of Etienne after the James Robinson trade. He's just the guy, and he didn't struggle whatsoever with that Vegas rush defense. Adam Thielen, he's kind of the one probably out of the big 3 they have in Minnesota now with Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. He's probably the one that suffered the most. He's still got 9.7, which is decent. He had 3 catches for 67 yards. I still believe Feelin is kind of touchdown dependent to have a good fantasy day, but it didn't matter for M, who was putting up 1 billion points anyway. So to get 9.7 out of a guy like that isn't too bad at all. Garrett Wilson did not struggle with Buffalo. I said it in my pod last week that if they were going to find him, they were going to find Garrett Wilson in this game, and they were going to have to throw the ball. And Buffalo struggles in those situations. They have as good as their defense is. They're not locked down to wide receivers by any means. And Garrett Wilson had 17.9 fantasy points. 8 catches for 92 yards. That's as good of a day as Stephon Diggs had. So Wilson he's making a case for offensive rookie of the year. He's probably not going to get it, but he's definitely he's in the top 2 best offensive rookies, or at least wide receivers. He's behind maybe Chris Olave, I guess, in New Orleans. I would say Garrett Wilson's probably the next best rookie wide receiver in this year's draft class. So another good day for him in New York, and that's just going to keep continuing. So, yeah, 17.9 points for him. Big day for Dallas Goedert on Thursday night. 8 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. Probably biggest game of his career, I think. 26.0 fantasy points. Getting that out of your tight end is massive. There are so few great tight ends in fantasy, and that's kind of just like an iffy position. So getting 26 out of him is just a gold mine for fantasy purposes. So good there. Eno Benjamin, God, he had been the guy in Arizona out of the backfield, while James Conner was gone, and so I was really curious how his time, or how his carry amount was going to factor with the return of James Conner, and it suffered, actually. And I know this game wasn't great anyway, but Eno Benjamin had at least been active in the passing game and just really couldn't get anything going at all. He had 12 rushing yards. He had 1 catch for 15 yards and 3.7 fantasy points. So if you're hoping that James Conner isn't going to just completely piss away his Benjamin's workload, but if that game was any indication at all, then that might not be good for him looking forward. But in a game where you have a guy, or in a week where you have a guy score 57 fucking fantasy points, you don't give a shit if your flex gets 3 points. He could have gotten 0, -10. It wouldn't have mattered at all. And then the Seattle defense was good and solid against Arizona like they were back in week 6. They recovered a fumble and only allowed 15 points. It was good for 11 fantasy points. So that's a good streaming option there. Like I said, I think the only thing that could have made M's day even better than winning by 35 or whatever it was having Justin Fields in her team. But why would you ever play Justin Fields over Josh Allen? I think you might have to going forward, because Josh Allen is dealing with an elbow injury that we're kind of unsure of, what the timetable for that's going to look like. It could be nothing or it could be serious. So, but the emergence of Justin Fields has been fucking incredible. I was such a Bears and Fields hater. I thought he was so bad and that Bears team was going to be so bad, but Justin Fields is playing like fucking Michael Vick here the last like 3-4 weeks. So you should take a lot of comfort in knowing that you have him on your bench if you have to use him going forward, especially with Josh Allen's nagging elbow thing now. So that's the only thing that would have made this week even better for M. She could have scored 200, even more than that, probably. So she could have scored 230 something. Yeah, 230 fantasy points, which would have been the most ever. I've never seen that much ever. But I mean, that's just we're just adding nothing to this. So M got the big win, and that's so unlucky for Sam. Not only to lose, to score 153 points and lose, but to end up in the fucking obituary column. That's absurd. And then there was another to this list here, and that is Vic. Oregon Jambalaya, which is exactly what his team has turned into. He lost 66.96 to 110. And a little bit of this was done by his own doing. He played Mark Andrews in his lineup, who was hurt, who didn't play, got 0 out of his tight end, and then played his kicker on a bye. Now, I don't know if it probably wouldn't have mattered at the end of the day, but it would have made this a little bit closer anyway. And you just can't play out and bye players, But that's not the only reason he lost. Robert Woods was healthy and finished with 0 points against Kansas City. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who I in my pod last week I said I did not like. I just thought it was a bad game script for him. That is very much what happens. He had 5 total yards, or he had 5 rushing yards, I should say, and he had 14 receiving yards, but that was only good for 2.9 fantasy points. Marcus Mariota, he had to pick him up because who's his normal quarterback? I guess Russell Wilson was on a bye, I guess, but Marcus Mariota just had 129 total yards. He didn't have any picks. He didn't throw any touchdowns. 7.56 fantasy points. He's just not a very good quarterback. Atlanta's just a terrible passing offense. Just wasn't great for Mariota. Jamal Williams did not play as big of a role against Green Bay as I thought he was going to. Definitely got that one wrong. He had 9.1 fantasy points, which isn't too bad, but I really thought he would be a lot more active in the passing game and would play a bigger role in this game, but he very much did not. Terry McLaurin, 5 catches for 56 yards. That's only so much you can do, in a bad offense. McLaurin is very much like the number 1 target. But against a decent defense like Minnesota, they're always going to target your top guy, right? So 10.6 for Terry McLaurin, but it's you need more than that when the rest of your team is just playing like shit. The one bright spot in all of Vic's team was Cooper Kupp, who scored against Tampa Bay. He had 8 catches, 127 yards, and a touchdown, almost 32 fantasy points. That's just a textbook Cooper Kupp good game. If only he could have had more than that, from his other guys, but. It's not a great spot for Vic this week at all. Just 66 fantasy points, and he's on a slide. Vic is. I think he's lost 5 straight weeks. It's going poorly for Vic. But maybe start playing people who are healthy. Don't play out players. Don't play. I don't know if you forgot to set your lineup or just maybe didn't think that Mark Andrews wasn't gonna miss or something, but. Find a way to get guys in your lineup. At least make it semi-close. I won't have to flame you for being in the obituary column this week, But what do I know? I put up barely more than Vic did, so I really can't say a whole lot. And then on the other side was Colin, who got a much needed win after changing his name to Tanking Time. He finally won, so good reverse psychology on the fantasy gods there. Trevor Lawrence. Pretty good game from him. He led a big second half comeback against Vegas. He had 235 yards and a touchdown. And he also had 53 yards on the ground too. So So good there. Good for 18.7 fantasy points. Leonard Fournette, he was more active in the air than he was on the ground. He had 41 receiving yards, 5 catches, and then he rushed 9 times for 19 yards. So he wasn't getting it done on the ground, but did okay enough in the air to get Colin double-digit 11 points there. DeAndre Swift, again, just that game just did not go in any fashion how I thought it was going to. Green Bay versus Detroit. I thought that was going to be a shootout. I thought both running backs in Detroit were going to play a pretty big role here, and really neither of them did, especially Swift. He had 10 rushing yards. And he had 40 receiving yards. So he was actually the more active running back in the air than Jamal Williams was, which I got wrong too. But it was a really low scoring, shitty game. 15-9 was Detroit's margin of victory, and the running backs didn't play any sort of real part in it. So just the 8 points for Swift, and just a 9.5 for Amon-Ra St. Brown, 4 catches for 55 yards. Just playing into that. It wasn't exactly an offensive powerhouse like I really thought it was going to be. But who was pretty good last night was Chris Olave. He had 6 catches for 71 yards and 13.1 points. The Saints were so fucking bad in this game, and it was frustrating as like a Kamara owner and someone who bet the Saints money line at home. It was really frustrating. Andy Dalton looked horrible in this game. The Saints O-line, which has been struggling, looked particularly bad in this game. They got to Andy Dalton pretty easily. It just wasn't a great game, but there was a little bit of a bright spot in Olave, who was pretty good when the ball was actually getting to him. So yeah, a 13.1 for him was pretty good there. Zach Ertz, he did this exact same thing against Seattle the first time they played, and he had 5 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown for 15 points. That pretty much was as expected. I thought he was going to get somewhere around what his first total was back in week 6 against these guys. It was pretty much a carbon copy week. So yeah, if you can get 15 points out of your tight end like Zach Ertz, which seems like what he's doing on a normal basis, you can take a lot of comfort in that one. Allen Lazard, he played and he was great. That's the one thing in that game I actually got correct, was that Lazard was going to play a big role. 4 catches, 87 yards, and a touchdown, 18.7 points. He was the only person that did anything in that Green Bay offense was when they could actually get the ball to him, but they struggled in the second half. Green Bay did, especially. Aaron Rodgers was throwing picks left and right. He was picked off twice in the red zone. I think one of those was in the end zone. I think one of those was to Allen Lazard. It might have been the one that got picked off in the end zone. But yeah, it was a good day for Lazard regardless. So Colin will be happy about that he had literally the only good player in that game on his team in his flex spot. And then Baltimore's defense looked good last night against the Saints. They had a pick, and they had only 13 points allowed for 12 points. So overall it wasn't a great day for Colin, but when your opponent puts up 67 points and plays 2 guys who are out or on a bye, then it's like Casey was against me. You don't have to be great, good, or even mediocre. You just have to, play enough guys and just get an okay amount of points, which is what Colin did. So much needed win for Colin, and just a bad poo-poo, no good day for Vic. And that'll do it for the obituary. So you can go ahead and stop the bagpipe music now. Okay, let's move on to the less shocking results here. And we will move on to, we'll save the best one for last. We'll move on to Ben versus Matt Morelli, who Matt came really close to getting the obituary this week. He missed it by 3 points, but it was just good enough. All right, we'll go ahead and start with Ben, who finished 129.72. And that starts with Kyler Murray. He was decent against Seattle. Again, it was better than it was in week 6. I think on week 6 he finished with like 15 or 16 or maybe 18 fantasy points. It was sub 20. And he had 23 in this one. He had 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he had 60 rushing yards too, which he was, kind of the theme in the last time those guys played. He had no trouble getting rushing yards, but yeah, they did lose at home to Seattle, but it was still a decent outing for Kyler Murray. Ramondre Stevenson, a little bit of a setback from last week. He had been getting like 20 plus the last 3-4 weeks, but he still got 16. He had 60 rushing yards. He had a receiving touchdown, as well as 10 receiving yards. So in a PPR, that's good news. And yeah, 16 points is about in the middle for Stevenson. That's probably a little bit closer to his floor actually, which is really good. So good there for Ben. Ben picked up Kenyon Drake, which was really, really smart, which is ironic because Matt Morelli actually dropped Kenyon Drake. But he had 93 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as 16 receiving yards, which was good for a total of just shy of 25 fantasy points. Yeah, he busted in twice. He looked really good. He was way more involved than Lamar Jackson was on the ground, and even Lamar Jackson was still really good on the ground, but I was wrong in the sense that I didn't think any of the Baltimore running backs were going to play any sort of a factor in this game at all, but Kenyon Drake sure did, got with the 25 fantasy points. So good, smart pickup there from Ben. DJ Moore, who had been so good lately, really struggled in this game. He had 2 catches for 24 yards against Cincinnati, just 4.4 fantasy points. This was a game that Cincinnati was just fucking pedal to the ground from the get-go, and they just did not let up. So it was really tough for Carolina to find their feet offensively in this game whatsoever. And Cincinnati's secondary was way better in this game than they were last week and the week prior. So it was tough for anybody on the Panthers to get anything going in this game. Tyler Lockett, Mr. Boom or Bust, was much more of a boom this week. He had 5 catches, 67 yards, and a touchdown against Arizona. Good for 17.7 fantasy points. That's definitely welcoming if you're Ben, because he's just like, you just never know which one Tyler Lockett's going to get. But this season especially, though, like he's definitely getting into double digits. He had 17, 15, 11. He had 3 the last time they played Arizona. That's why I didn't like him. I really thought it was going to be a similar situation for him, so I was wrong there. But way better this go around against Seattle, or I'm sorry, against Arizona. And it's been a good year for Lockett, surprisingly. He's wide receiver 9 on the season, so he was much better. Taysom Hill, he had himself a Taysom Hill game. I've said it before where he's either going to have 40 or he's going to have 0. And he was closer to the latter in this one. He had 1.12 fantasy points. And that's because he rushed once for 6 yards. And I think he attempted a pass or 2, if I'm not mistaken. But he's just such a weird Swiss Army knife in that offense. You just don't know how he's going to be used, if he's going to be used at all. And this is just a game where he just really wasn't used at all. So yeah, just the 1.12 for him. Kelsey was great against Tennessee, as I predicted he would be. One of the few things this weekend I got correct, I feel like. 10 catches for 106 yards. The only thing he didn't do was get in the end zone. If you watch that game, on Sunday night, they threw to him so much, especially in the second half. It was just a good PPR day for Kelsey, as it so often is. But yeah, like I said, the only thing he didn't do was get in the end zone, but 22.6 was plenty enough for Ben. And then he had the Minnesota defense against Washington. They were good and solid. They had 1 pick and 17 points allowed for 9 fantasy points. So it didn't matter in the end for Ben that they weren't elite, but the Minnesota defense isn't exactly elite. I know they're 7-1, but their defense is pretty average. So yeah, 9 points was good and solid. So it was a pretty good week for Ben. 130 points, and Ben's flying right now. God, I think Ben's won 3 or 4 in a row, something like that. He is soaring toward the top of the table. As for Matt, couple duds in his lineup here. Justice Hill, He's kind of like the afterthought running back in that Baltimore offense, and he showed it in that game. He had just 11 yards, 2.9 fantasy points. Tyler Higbee was healthy in this game, and I liked him for the most part. I thought a lot of quick dump off passes against a tough Tampa Bay defense, but he had one target and he didn't catch it. So 0.0, just double donuts for Higbee. That's tough. But other than that, it wasn't too bad. Those are the two guys that fucked him for sure. But Tom Brady was okay. He had 17.2, 280 yards and a touchdown. It was a decent day for him in a toughie against the Rams. It was a terrible game, but it was a decent game for him. I know in his press conference after the game, he came out and he was just like, "Oh, that was fucking awesome." He said, "That was just so fucking awesome. Like that, what a game." I was like, "Well, not if you watched it, but I guess if you're him and you really needed to win, yeah, fair enough. But it was not fucking awesome if you watched a 16-13 game in a Super Bowl, like a Super Bowl rematch. Just icky." But anyway, Miles Sanders was just good and solid as he always is. 93 yards and a touchdown. He didn't chip in anything in the air, but they didn't need him to. So yeah, 15.3. Miles Sanders is one of the guys I liked most to score a touchdown this week, so I'm happy to get that one right. And Matt will be happy too. Played a big part in his offense this week. As did A.J. Brown, 4 catches, 59 yards and a touchdown. He was another one. You really liked him. He's just such a huge part of that Philly offense now, being with his first season with Philly. And he got 15.9 points. I was probably expecting a little bit more, to be totally honest with you, but that's actually not true, because if I remember right, I predicted that this game was going to be a lot on the ground. I probably expected a little bit better day out of Miles Sanders, even though he had a great game, but we don't need to get back into that. Good day for A.J. Brown, 15.9 fantasy points. Juju was very good as well, as was expected against a Titans team that just does not play well against opposing wide receivers. They have a terrible secondary. He had 10 catches, 88 yards, 18.8 fantasy points. That's a big day. And the only thing you're missing out of him is a touchdown. I don't think he ever really kind of came close to a touchdown in that game, but PPR, it's a great week for him. Mecole Hardman got in, and the reason he got in is because he's such a dual threat. He's being used kind of like Deebo Samuel was last year. They're lining him up at wide receiver. He's rushing the ball. He didn't do any of that this week, so that just ignore what I just said. That was fucking useless, because in this game he caught his touchdown. He had 6 catches, 79 yards, and a touchdown. He has rushed for a few touchdowns this year, which is kind of why my little thing made sense to me. But in this game, 19.9 fantasy points. He was just a big PPR guy again, like in that offense where Mahomes just throws the ball to anybody with fucking arms. And yeah, just a good day for him. And a much better game out of the Cincinnati defense than Matt got out of Cleveland here a couple weeks ago. They had 2 picks, a fumble recovery. Did allow 21 points, but when your offense puts up fucking 42 and your running back scores 5 touchdowns, they don't need to be great. And Matt, definitely benefited off that game script. But in the end, it was guys like Justice Hill and Higbee that really, really boned him. 2 different players could probably get you 22 fantasy points for sure. But just wasn't that week, and it's just kind of been a toughie for Matt Morelli so far. So Ben gets the win, 129 to 107. Next is Abby and Matt Glassmeyer. So we'll go ahead and start with Abby, who got Mahomes. I predicted Mahomes to have a big game. I said 300 plus yards and 3 touchdowns. He blew that out of the water. He had 446 yards. I think he had 2 total touchdowns. He had 1 rushing touchdown and 1 in the air. He had 63 rushing yards. It was a good day on the ground for Mahomes. 38.14 fantasy points. So yeah, it was very much, that was always going to happen, that Mahomes coming off a bye, playing a terrible Tennessee secondary. Great game for him and good for Abby there. Dalvin Cook, 47 yards and a receiving touchdown. He had a great catch on his touchdown too. Abby, I really hope that you're glad that you didn't trade Dalvin Cook, because he's been so good in every week that you didn't that you tried to trade him and that you didn't trade him. He's been really good. Just imagine Casey with this guy on his team. He would never fucking lose again. So Abby, I'm really happy you hung on to him. And I'm hoping you are too, because 13.6 fantasy points is a good day, and he hasn't had a bad day this or in the last like 3-4 weeks. He had 27 last week. 18, 26. Good for you for letting us kind of berate you into not trading him. Another good game out of Dameon Pierce. I didn't know how that was going to go with him against Philly. They're just tough. But Dameon Pierce got 139 total yards and 15.9 fantasy points. It's just a day as advertised from him that he's just been having all season. He's finished with double digits in all but the first 2 weeks, when they were still kind of figuring him out, how he was going to be. But ever since it's became the Dameon Pierce show in Houston, he's been fantastic. So 15.9 points is just on par for a day from him for sure. T. Higgins, you're probably like me. You're a little disappointed, in a game where Cincinnati had 42 points, and you have Higgins, I had Boyd. We should both be benefiting from the Jamar Chase injury, but we really haven't yet. Seven catches for 60 yards, 13 points is good. It's not a bad day at all, and you won, so I know you don't probably care, but you'd probably be expecting more out of these guys in such a pass-heavy offense, or what was, I guess, a pass-heavy offense before they let fucking Mixon score 5 touchdowns, but it's not a bad day for Higgins still. Double digits. If you can get double digits out of your wide receiver, that's good. I'm personally just a little disappointed in Higgins and Tyler Boyd's involvement now that their best wide receiver is gone. You'd think that they'd just be blowing up, but they just kind of haven't yet. But still, I'm just picky. So, and this isn't even my team, so this doesn't fucking matter. Mike Evans, 5 catches for 40 yards. Yeah, he just played in a tough game where both the defenses were decent. Still 9.0 in a game like that's not too bad. He was targeted enough where in a PPR you got decent points out of him. Noah Fant had a good game, had a way better game than he had in week 6. I got that wrong. He had 5 catches for 96 yards. He was absolutely used pretty heavily in this game, and 14.6 fantasy points is much better than I thought he was going to do. So yeah, good there. Josh Palmer, this is one of the few I got right. Loved Josh Palmer this week. The only thing I got wrong about him is that he didn't score a touchdown, which he should have. He had 8 catches for 106 yards and 20.6 fantasy points. So great usage from Abby there in her flex. Palmer, no Mike Williams, no Keenan Allen. It was a big opportunity for him to have a big game, and he sure did with 20.6. Abby's lucky because on a different day, getting -5 out of your defense would normally hurt you, but in this week, it didn't matter. She could get away with it. Carolina was just terrible. They allowed 42 points, didn't force any turnovers. I thought they were going to have a tough one with Cincinnati being back at home after laying a fucking chud to the Browns. And that's very much what happened. But again, didn't matter. They could have given up -10 and Abby still would have won. So good matchup for Abby this week. Who got Matt, who fell back to earth after getting a win last week. Aaron Rodgers was fucking bad in this game. I know he got 15.6, and when you look at that doesn't seem too bad, but 15.64 in this game where he should have murdered fucking Detroit. And I said it last week too. I said if this isn't the Aaron Rodgers game, like to get back on track, then I think you almost have to cut ties with the guy. He's just not fucking good. He had 291 yards, 1 touchdown, and threw 3 picks, and he threw 3 picks in the red zone, or I think 2 in the red zone and 1 in the end zone. He looked bad. He's just a big ayahuasca drinking fucking hack now. Aaron Rodgers is. It's so hard to trust him. I know Matt didn't have a choice because Jimmy Garoppolo was on bye, but after that performance against a bad Detroit team, I don't see how you can trust Aaron Rodgers going forward. I just can't. I was totally wrong about that. I was wrong about Green Bay. I was totally wrong about Aaron Jones too. He has had 25 rushing yards for 6.5 fantasy points, and he only chipped in with 20 in the air. Like Green Bay's offense just looked so fucking bad in this game that Aaron Jones just could not get involved. That Detroit actually did a good job at keeping him at bay. So yeah, I was totally wrong about that. But at least Matt has Kenneth Walker on his team, who is probably going to be the offensive rookie of the year now. That it fucking came out of nowhere and exploded. That since he's been given the starting job, he had 29.9 fantasy points, 109 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 20 receiving yards. And that's just his kind of game, 29, 12, 33, 19, 17 since he's gotten the starting job in Seattle. So those I think that's offensive rookie of the year numbers as long as he doesn't get hurt, because he's just going to be utilized like that the whole time. So didn't matter for Matt, but at least Kenneth Walker is doing exactly what he should. Who's not though is Gabe Davis. He's becoming an afterthought in that Buffalo offense, which is really surprising to me because I was so big on Gabe Davis going into the season. He looked great right at the very start, and he's just fading into obscurity. 2 catches for 33 yards, 5.3 points. I know they played a tough one on the road at the Jets, but even in favorable matchups, Gabe Davis is not performing. He's not putting, at least fantasy wise, he's just not. It's not an output guy at all. I think he's a better real life player than he is a fantasy guy, which is the case for so many good players. I think he's just in that conversation. So it's becoming tough to trust Gabe Davis as well. DeAndre Hopkins. He did get in the end zone, 13.6 fantasy points, but he looked a little bit more human this week. They weren't able to just bombard him with targets like they have in the last few weeks. He had 4 catches for 36 yards. The touchdown salvaged his fantasy day for sure. But yeah, it's just the Seattle did a good job kind of keeping him contained. And yeah, just the 13.6 fantasy points. That was a much more human day for D-Hop than he had been having, which was, if you're Matt, was unfortunate. Kyle Pitts fucking had a Kyle Pitts day, 2 catches for 27 yards. He's such a naturally talented guy, and he's another one, like I was just saying about Gabe Davis. I think he's a better real-life player than he is a fantasy player because, God, last week he had 19, and then the week before he had 3, and then he had 10.9, and then 3, and then 13.7. It's like boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust. You just don't know what kind of day he's going to have. It seems like it's just every other game. So maybe next game he'll be good. But Atlanta they hung in there with the Chargers. The offense didn't look great, but neither did the Chargers offense really either, which is the only reason this was close. But Kyle Pitts just didn't play a factor, which is 4.7 fantasy points. Cordero Patterson came back off the IR and was great. He had 2 touchdowns, 18.3 fantasy points. He had 44 rushing yards, and he had just 1 catch for 9 yards. So he's the best player in that team, Cordero Patterson is, which is crazy. He's like a 31 or 32-year-old running back, which historically just those guys suck. But Cordero Patterson's he's just talented. He's just fucking good. 18.3 fantasy points. Matt will be happy to get him back in his lineup for sure, at least in a flex spot. And then, yeah, Matt got 10 out of Indianapolis' defense, which I think was about right. That wasn't a very good game. Their defense kind of kept him in it because their offense looked so fucking bad. God, I hate the Colts so much. They're so fucking bad. They finally fired Frank Reich, their coach, which was probably 4 weeks too late. I like him too. If you watch Hard Knocks, the Colts were the featured last season, and he's a good dude. He's cool. He's a nice guy, but God, he's running such a fucking bad football team that it's no shit he got fired. Colts lost 3-26. Their defense, they recovered a fumble, which got them back to level to 10 points where they started, but they gave up 20. They gave up 20 points. So not a great day for Matt overall. A couple, Aaron Jones let him down so bad. Aaron Rodgers let him down terribly, and just Pitts and Gabe Davis. It was a tough for Matt this week, who actually falls back to 12th place with him losing and Liv getting her win, which I'll get to here in just a second. Make sure which is now, actually. Yeah, I guess I'm at everybody except for Liv and Al, which I saved for last because Liv won 121.9 to 119.12. This was really, really close. Liv had the edge going into last night's game with Baltimore and New Orleans, and she needed Lamar Jackson and Traquan Smith to have average games, and it turned out that was the case. So we'll start with Al here. Lamar Jackson wasn't bad. He had 133 passing yards. He had 82 rushing yards, but he threw just the one touchdown. At home, New Orleans plays tough defense, which is why I liked them in this game. But their offense looked so bad, and they had trouble getting to Lamar. I said last week that New Orleans is worst in the league at pressure rate against quarterbacks. So Lamar had the time to do what he needed to do. Unfortunately for him, he had no Mark Andrews, which is such a huge part of that offense. And if Mark Andrews had played, I think this would have gone better for Lamar Jackson. But he had 19.52, which in normal circumstances is fine. It just wasn't quite enough this week for Al. Eckler was great in this game. He did fumble, but he had 47 rushing yards. He had a receiving touchdown, a rushing touchdown. He had 24 receiving yards. It was just a good Eckler game, and it always favored him with how many injuries are in that LA offense right now. But they did manage to squeak out a road win against Atlanta. He had 24.1 fantasy points. It was as expected a good day for Eckler. I liked him a lot last week. Josh Jacobs wasn't quite as good as I thought he was going to be. He had 11.7 fantasy points. He had 67 rushing yards, excuse me. And he also had 20 receiving yards. So it was an okay day for him. He had 11.7 fantasy points, but I expected better out of him, as I'm sure Al did. That Jacksonville's not particularly tough against running backs, but they just got completely dominated in the second half. It was all Jacksonville. Like I said, they scored 27 unanswered points in this game. So it didn't go well for Josh Jacobs and just the Raiders' offense in general in the second half. Tyreek Hill continues just to be a fucking monster. He had 7 catches, 143 yards, and a touchdown against Chicago for 29.3 fantasy points. He's very clearly wide receiver 1, and for very obvious reasons. He had one bad week against Buffalo back in week 3, where I think he had like 5 fantasy points, but he's been pushing like 30 in every other week. He had 48 in week 2, so he's just a fantasy gold mine, and he's actually almost better than he was on the Chiefs. It's crazy. Even with Waddle there, it's crazy. He's on his way to 2,000 plus receiving yards, which is unbelievable. And it just doesn't look like he's going to slow down. So yeah, huge week for Tyreek Hill. Less good week for Chris Godwin. Just kind of the same situation as like Mike Evans. It was a tough day for Tampa Bay. They had to really grind out that low scoring win. He still had 7 catches for 36 yards. He got 10.7 fantasy points. Which was about expected, I think, just kind of a tough game, but he still did enough to get a decent fantasy week. Tonyan, who I really liked, was dead wrong. That Green Bay offense was so fucking terrible against Detroit. Just 3 catches for 29 yards and 5.9. Definitely expected a lot more out of him. Traquan Smith also got 5.9 fantasy points, just 3 catches for 29 yards. He kind of just blends into the background in that New Orleans offense. But, with the injuries of Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry, you'd think he'd maybe play a little bit big of a role. But I think it came more so down to just how bad Andy Dalton looked in this game, and just out of sync and just not great that New Orleans just looked like in general. So just a 5.9 for him. Kansas City's defense was not quite as good as I thought they were going to be as well. I got that one wrong. I thought Kansas City was just going to fucking steamroll these guys, but had to go into overtime and beat them by a field goal. Beat them 20-17. Kansas City didn't force any turnovers. Even though Malik Willis just didn't look very good in this game, and Tennessee is very turnover prone, but Kansas City just couldn't force anything out of them. So finished with just the 6 points this week, and I think kind of a spot like that, and like Tanyan are really why Alden win this game. I think everybody else did kind of what was expected, but I think KC's defense just let him down, and Tanyan and Green Bay just really let him down. So. 119.12 is what Al finished with. And Liv just nicked him at 121.9. Justin Herbert was not again, I was wrong. I was definitely way more wrong this week than I was right, and Herbert was one of them. I liked him a lot this week, and he was okay. He had 245 yards and a touchdown. He did throw a pick, and he finished with just 14.1. He definitely suffered from not having his offensive weapons in this game. I didn't think that was going to matter that much, but it definitely played a role. It played a factor in that. But he still got the win. Still, he got double-digit points. 14 is not what you're looking for out of a guy like Herbert, but Liv got the win. She won't care. Who did what he was supposed to was Derrick Henry. He had 115 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, and he also chipped in with 0 receiving yards. So never mind. 25.5 fantasy points. Derrick Henry he's just gonna run through anybody you throw at him. It doesn't matter. He's pretty much the only good player on that entire team. Tennessee sucks. But they have Derrick Henry. They can just give him the ball until he fucking passes out. And he was the only reason Tennessee were in that game at all. 2 touchdowns, 115 yards. Singletary got a tough matchup against the Jets. He finished with 8.8 points. He had just 24 rushing yards. He had 24 receiving yards, which kind of salvaged him a little bit. Got him up close near 10 points, but yeah, it was just a tough grind him out game against Buffalo that they ultimately lost on the road to the Jets, and he just didn't really play that much of a role. And to be fair, the Jets are decent on the ground to 2 running backs. So yeah, it wasn't a great game for him. Metcalf was good. 5 catches, 37 yards, and a touchdown. Wasn't quite as good as Lockett, but he was in the conversation too. He managed to get a score. And just kind of, did his job in the win against Arizona, got in the end zone. Mooney's value is catapulted for sure. Even with the arrival of Chase Claypool, Mooney's still there. I was dead wrong about that. I hated Mooney this week because of Claypool and because I thought Miami's defense was going to be a lot tougher in this game. But I have seen the light on the Bears and Justin Fields. Mooney had 7 catches, 43 yards, and a touchdown. I think we're going to see a lot of that going forward with how good Fields is and how much better the Bears have been. 17.5 fantasy points out of him is, I think, something to be expected more going forward. Everett definitely wasn't as good, and the Chargers just weren't as good as I thought. He had 5 catches for 36 yards, 8.6 points. It's not terrible out of your tight end, but given all the injuries in LA, I really thought he was going to play a bigger role. I thought his target share was going to be so much bigger than it was, but still 8.6 isn't too bad, I guess. Antonio Gibson, his role is just kind of waning a little bit in that Washington running game, and they had a tough one against Minnesota, who's been decent against running backs. He had just the 36 rushing yards and 11 receiving yards, which is lower than he had been getting lately. Finished with just 6.7. And then 9 points out of Miami. That's not bad considering they gave up 32 points. I really thought they would be stronger in this game, but they finished with 9 still. They had a pick 6 and they blocked a kick, which played a big part in why they finished with 9. So it's not too bad. But kind of the sneaky winner here for Liv was Nick Folk, the kicker for New England. He went 4 for 4 with 2 extra points, 17 fantasy points. If you can get that big out of your kicker, you're more often than not going to win your fantasy matchup. So, like I said, it came down to the wire. Liv was done. It didn't have anybody last night, and Al had the two guys, had Lamar Jackson and Traquan Smith. Fuck me. And just couldn't quite get it done. And like I said, it was just a couple letdowns. Like I said, Casey's defense, and Green Bay and Tanya, and just let them down. But it's a good win for Liv that gets her off the bottom of the table back up into 11th, and Al drops a little bit. But that's fucking fantasy football for you in a nutshell. It's just a weird week, or weird week really, and weird season in general. Just like Green Bay's fucking terrible. Jonathan Taylor, the unanimous number one pick in almost every fantasy draft, has been fucking terrible. Where all these rookies that are coming out have been better than expected. Kenneth Walker, Damian Pierce, and just injuries and just weird shit going on, But that's why fantasy football's fucking fantastic. I know it's making it tougher for fantasy scores this year and for a lot of us, but I mean, you just never know what's going to happen every week, but we're getting a lot of high scoring, except unless you're like Vic, But yeah, I guess that's it. So yeah, if I'll put this out tonight and make sure it's out tonight, and then I'll do an email for the preview on Thursday. But if you guys take the time and listen to it, looks like I'm just at like an hour now, which is what I'm hoping to get at, normally. If you like this version better than the preview, please just let me know. But if you like a little bit longer and you like if you like the preview kind of setting better, just all you got to do is just let me know, because I'm down to just keep experimenting with shit, just trying new things, just trying to keep it fresh, so it's not just a fucking dull listen every week and a dull read every week. So happy to keep switching it up, doing what everybody wants to do. I'm a man of the people. Just let me know. So you guys have a great rest of your Tuesday night. I will talk to you when I talk to you. Peace.